June 20th, 1791. Under the cover of night, a heavy carriage rumbles through the French countryside. Inside, disguised as servants, are the King and Queen of France, desperately trying to escape with their lives. Their goal is simple: get out of Paris, where the revolution has made them prisoners in their own palace. But this isn't just an escape. It's a high-stakes gamble for the very soul of France. And its failure is about to seal their fate, turning dissent into bloodshed and transforming a political crisis into a legend of tragedy. So how did the most powerful monarchy in Europe fall so far, so fast? How did a king and queen become hated symbols of tyranny? To understand that, we have to go back 2 decades. Back to a teenage wedding, a political deal designed to unite 2 great warring empires. It was a union of children, meant to secure an era of peace. Instead, it lit the fuse on one of the most violent and transformative revolutions the world has ever seen. To really get the marriage of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, you first have to get the world that created it. The mid-18th century was a brutal chess match played by ambitious empires across the map of Europe. For centuries, the 2 biggest players on the continent, the Bourbon monarchy of France and the Habsburg dynasty of Austria, were stuck in a bitter, almost hereditary rivalry. They were Europe's 2 titans, and their hatred for each other had fueled countless wars, costing millions of livres and hundreds of thousands of lives. But the game was changing. A new aggressive power was rising: Prussia, under its ambitious king, Frederick the Great. In a stunning geopolitical pivot known as the Diplomatic Revolution of 1756, old enemies had to rethink everything. Suddenly, France and Austria found themselves facing a common threat. The devastating 7 Years' War, a conflict that sprawled from North American forests to European plains, had left France humiliated and its treasury dangerously empty. The war proved the old rivalries were unsustainable, especially with new threats from Prussia and the ever-expanding British Empire. So, in the glittering courts of Vienna and Versailles, a plan was hatched. It was a strategy as old as monarchy itself: seal a fragile new alliance not with ink and parchment, but with blood and vows. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, a shrewd and powerful ruler, saw the path forward. She proposed to end generations of hostility by marrying one of her daughters to the heir of the French throne. The chosen daughter was her youngest, the lively Archduchess Maria Antoinette. The groom? Louis Auguste, grandson of France's reigning king, Louis XIV. This was never going to be a marriage of love. It was a cold, calculated act of statecraft, a human sacrifice of sorts on the altar of international politics. The children were just pawns in a grand dynastic game. Their happiness, their compatibility, their desires, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the alliance. But in tying their fates together, their parents were also unknowingly binding them to a destiny of public resentment and political catastrophe. So who were these 2 teenagers with the weight of European peace on their shoulders? Well, they couldn't have been more different. Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, was 15 years old. He wasn't the dashing, charismatic prince you read about in fairy tales. He was a shy, serious, and somewhat awkward kid. He was heavy-set and lacked the natural charm of his grandfather, the notorious womanizer King Louis XV. Louis Auguste was smart, with a real interest in geography, science, and mechanics. His greatest passion was locksmithing. He even had a private workshop at Versailles, where he'd spend hours meticulously crafting locks and keys. That hobby spoke volumes about him. He preferred quiet solitude and tangible problems, with clear solutions over the messy, treacherous world of court politics. He was a good man, deeply religious and well-intentioned, but he was also painfully indecisive, easily influenced, and completely uncomfortable with the public ceremonies that were the lifeblood of the monarchy. In almost every way, he was ill-suited for the role of an absolute monarch in a kingdom that was starting to boil over with discontent. Hundreds of miles away in Vienna, the 14-year-old Archduchess Maria Antoinette was his total opposite. She was vivacious, charming, and impulsive. Her own brother called her honest and lovable. Raised in the more relaxed Austrian court, she had a natural, unpretentious charm. She wasn't a scholar. In fact, her academic education was a bit lacking. She much preferred music, dancing, and theater to books and political debates. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, was constantly worried about her daughter's frivolous nature, sending her a stream of letters urging her to be more serious and to always remember her duty. And that duty was crystal clear. Go to France, win over her husband and the French people, and be a living symbol of the new Franco-Austrian alliance. In 1770, it was a done deal. Maria Antonia had to formally renounce all claims to the Habsburg thrones. She was packed up, along with a massive collection of gowns and jewels, and sent on a journey to the French border. There, on an island in the Rhine River, a symbolic handoff took place. She was ritually stripped of all her Austrian clothes, her Austrian friends, even her pet pug. Everything that connected her to her past was taken away. She was then redressed in French finery and officially became Marie Antoinette. From that moment on, she was no longer Austrian, she was the Dauphine of France. Imagine that, for a 14-year-old girl who had never even met her future husband. She was now a foreigner in a strange land, her entire identity remade to serve the ambitions of others. On May 16, 1770, the Palace of Versailles put on a show of opulence that was simply staggering. The wedding of Louis Auguste and Marie Antoinette was designed to scream power and wealth, a celebration of the new alliance. The ceremony took place in the brand-new Royal Opera House at Versailles, a marvel of gold and blue velvet. 5,000 guests, the absolute cream of European aristocracy, crammed into the palace, their jewels glittering under the light of thousands of candles. Louis, just 15, wore a suit of silver cloth, while Marie Antoinette, 14, was in a magnificent gown of white and silver, heavy with diamonds. To the outside world, it looked like a fairy tale. But even with all that splendor, there were troubling signs. The mood among the French people, and even within the court, wasn't entirely celebratory. The alliance with Austria, their historic enemy, was deeply unpopular. You couldn't just erase decades of anti-Austrian feelings with one wedding. From the very beginning, Marie Antoinette was viewed with suspicion. They called her l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman, a nickname that would stick with her until her death, a constant reminder that she was an outsider. The wedding night itself turned into the first of many PR disasters for the young couple. For a royal marriage, consummation wasn't a private matter. It was an act of state, essential for producing an heir. But on that night, and for many nights after, nothing happened. This failure immediately became whispered gossip, and then open ridicule. The court physician examined the young Dauphin and declared there was no physical problem. The issue, it seemed, was more complicated. Louis was paralyzed by a mix of his own shyness, a strict religious upbringing, and what historians now think was a deep psychological block. He was a boy thrust into a situation he wasn't ready for, and he just froze. This private failure had huge public consequences. The whole point of their union, to make an heir, wasn't happening. As weeks turned into years, their childless state became a national scandal. In the grubby print shops of Paris, vicious, obscene cartoons and pamphlets started to circulate. They mocked the king as impotent. They painted the queen as a frustrated, promiscuous adulteress. These weren't just personal insults. They were political weapons. They chipped away at the mystique of the monarchy, presenting the king and queen as flawed, pathetic figures. The unconsummated marriage became a powerful metaphor for the monarchy itself, sterile, dysfunctional, and unable to secure France's future. For 7 long, excruciating years, the marriage remained unconsummated. This period of failure shaped both of their personalities and defined the early years of their reign. For Louis, who became King Louis XVI in 1774, it was a source of deep personal shame and public humiliation. It made his natural indecisiveness even worse. How could he command a nation when he couldn't command his own wife in the bedroom? He retreated further into his solitary hobbies, finding comfort in maps and locks, things he could actually understand and control. For Marie Antoinette, those 7 years were intensely lonely and frustrating. She was trapped in a gilded cage, suffocated by the rigid etiquette of the French court. Her one job was to provide an heir, and her failure to do so left her completely vulnerable. From Vienna, her mother sent a constant stream of nagging letters, demanding intimate details and blaming Marie Antoinette for not being seductive enough. "You are both young," the Empress wrote. "I flatter myself that I shall yet embrace a grandson." So what does a lonely, frustrated queen do? She seeks an escape. Marie Antoinette threw herself into a life of pleasure and extravagance. She became a fashion icon, making towering hairstyles and lavish gowns popular. She gambled, often for high stakes, and attended masked balls in Paris, far from the prying eyes of the court. She created her own private world at the Petit Trianon, a small chateau on the grounds of Versailles that the king gave her. There, she could pretend she wasn't a queen, living a simpler life surrounded by a tight-knit circle of friends. While this was a coping mechanism for a lonely young woman, it was a political disaster. To a public facing bread shortages and economic hardship, the queen's lifestyle looked frivolous, wasteful, and totally disconnected from their suffering. Her spending, often exaggerated by her enemies, earned her the nickname Madame Deficit. Her preference for her private circle was seen as an insult to the French nobility, who felt snubbed. Every party, every dress, every retreat to the Petit Trianon was twisted and used against her, cementing her reputation as a thoughtless foreigner who cared nothing for France. The breakthrough finally came in 1777, after a visit from Marie Antoinette's brother, the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II. He came to Versailles specifically to sort out the marital crisis. He had long, frank talks with both Louis and his sister, later describing them in his letters as two complete blunderers. He gave Louis some practical, man-to-man advice and scolded his sister for her lack of patience. Whatever he said, it worked. Shortly after he left, the marriage was finally consummated. A year later, in 1778, Marie Antoinette gave birth to their first child, a daughter. The birth of a son and heir, Louis-Joseph, followed in 1781. But the damage had been done. 7 years of scandal had permanently tarnished their reputations. Even the birth of their children didn't stop the rumors. Pamphlets now claimed the children were illegitimate. The private crisis had become a public poison that had already seeped deep into the foundations of the monarchy. Once her children were born, Marie Antoinette's position at court was secure, and her political influence grew. She was no longer just a symbol. She was the mother of the future king. Louis XV, who was truly devoted to her, started letting her have a significant say in matters of state. She pushed for her own candidates for government positions and took a keen interest in foreign policy, often favoring her native Austria. But this was just another political minefield. The French court was a snake pit of factions, and every time she influenced an appointment, she made new enemies. The old nobility hated her power, seeing her as an unqualified foreigner meddling where she didn't belong. Her political role just reinforced the public's view of her as l'Autrichienne, an Austrian spy working against France. This toxic perception exploded with the affair of the diamond necklace in 1785. It was a scandal that Marie Antoinette was completely innocent in, yet it destroyed what little was left of her public reputation. A con artist, the Comtesse de la Motte, tricked the vain Cardinal de Rohan. She convinced him that the Queen secretly wanted an absurdly expensive diamond necklace, one the king had already refused to buy, and that if he got it for her, he'd win her favor. The cardinal fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. He got the necklace, gave it to the Comtesse, who promptly had it broken up and sold on the black market. When the jewelers demanded payment, the whole plot unraveled, and here Louis made a disastrous decision. Hoping a public trial would clear the Queen's name, he had the cardinal publicly arrested. The move backfired spectacularly. The cardinal was acquitted, becoming a hero in the public eye for standing up to the monarchy. Despite her innocence, everyone assumed the worst of Marie Antoinette. They believed she was either guilty of fraud or of having an affair with the cardinal. The affair confirmed every negative stereotype about her, that she was deceitful, materialistic, and corrupt. It was a PR nightmare from which they would never recover. It proved that in the court of public opinion, the Queen was already guilty, no matter what the facts were. While the Queen was becoming a lightning rod for public hatred, the King seemed incapable of doing anything. The kingdom was hurtling towards bankruptcy. France's role in the American Revolution, while a win against Britain, had been ruinously expensive. Bad harvests drove the price of bread to unbearable levels. And the tax system was ridiculously unfair. The clergy and nobility paid almost nothing, leaving the entire burden on the commoners. Reform was desperately needed. Louis's ministers proposed sensible solutions, like taxing the rich, but every time they were blocked by powerful nobles. Louis, despite being an absolute monarch, lacked the backbone to force the changes through. He would waver, promise reform, and then back down. His indecisiveness looked like weakness, and his failure to fix the financial crisis created a sense of rage across the country. The people were starving, the state was broke, and the king, it seemed, did nothing. By 1789, France was a powder keg. Years of economic pain, social inequality, and political paralysis had pushed the country to a breaking point. In a last-ditch effort to solve the financial crisis, Louis XVI convened the Estates General, an old representative assembly that hadn't met in 175 years. It was a fateful decision. The representatives of the common people, fired up by Enlightenment ideas about liberty and rights, didn't just come to talk about taxes. They came to demand fundamental change. Things quickly spiraled out of the king's control. When the commoners were locked out of the main assembly hall, they gathered at a nearby tennis court and swore an oath not to leave until they had written a new constitution for France. It was an open act of defiance. The king was losing control. In Paris, tensions exploded. On July 14, 1789, fearing a military crackdown, an angry mob stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress and a symbol of royal power. The French Revolution had begun. In October, the revolution came knocking on Versailles' door. A massive crowd of Parisian women, enraged by the price of bread, marched the 12 miles to the palace armed with pikes and knives. They broke through the gates, demanding bread and hunting for the Queen, screaming for her death. Marie Antoinette barely escaped with her life, fleeing through a secret passage just moments before the mob tore her bed to shreds. The next day, the royal family was forced to leave the splendor of Versailles for the Tuileries Palace in the heart of Paris. And that brings us back to that dark road out of Paris on the night of June 20th, 1791. The failed escape to Varennes was the point of no return. By trying to flee, Louis proved to his people that he wasn't a citizen king who would accept a new constitution. He was a traitor who had tried to abandon his nation to link up with foreign armies. The last shred of trust between the monarchy and the people was gone. The end came swiftly and brutally. In August 1792, the monarchy was officially abolished. Louis and Marie Antoinette were arrested and imprisoned. Put on trial for treason, Louis XVI was found guilty, and on January 21, 1793, he was executed by the guillotine. He met his end with a quiet dignity that had often escaped him in life. Marie Antoinette languished in prison for another 9 months, enduring a sham trial before following her husband to the scaffold on October 16, 1793. The marriage meant to seal an alliance and secure the power of 2 great dynasties ended under the blade of a guillotine. It was a union born of political calculation that became a catalyst for both personal and national tragedy. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette weren't evil. They were flawed people, products of their time, placed in a situation they were uniquely unequipped to handle. Their story is a chilling reminder of how the grand impersonal forces of history can shape and ultimately destroy individual lives, and how a marriage intended to be a symbol of power can instead become a symbol of everything that is broken, fueling the very revolution that consumes it.